Howdy YouTube, Murphy Firearms Training, part 2 of reloading. So we talked about sizing, and I'm actually going to just come in here and show you a few. So we'll take our brass and we'll come in and we'll size it all the way down. You'll hear your primer drop, okay? And I'll set these in my loading tray. So we talked about how to set up the sizing die. Your next step after sizing is priming, and so I'll show you a few of those. Okay, so we'll prime a few. So your options for priming these, one is you can hand prime. So we've got our hand primer here, and I always label what's in my hand primer. So those large pistol primers, if something happens, I've got to set my stuff down and walk away from my bench. I know what's in here. It's a number 11 shell holder. It is a different shell holder. Let me dig this out of here for you. Got a primer in there crooked. It is a different shell holder. So here is the Lee hand prime shell holder. It's just flat. And then here's the press shell holder. It's got that ridge that locks into the press. So two different shell holders. You do have to, if you have a hand primer, you do have to have the the hand prime shell holders. Now, with that said, get back in there. With that said, I don't hand prime pistols unless they're like magnum loads, or I do hand prime my hunting loads for my rifles. And that just helps me get kind of a more consistent seating depth. So I don't hand prime most of my pistols unless they're like really big magnums and I want to try and shoot for accuracy. But so option 2, other than hand priming, is you got this priming arm comes on your press, and it just hooks in at about a 40-degree angle there, and then it pivots when you on your downstroke. And so you size, and then when you come back down, set a primer in there. Well, if it won't stick to my finger, try again. Set a primer in there, and you prime on the downstroke. And you just give that a good push, and voila, primed. So that's your second step, is priming. And typically, on a single stage press like this, priming is part of the sizing operation. So you'll size, and then you'll prime, and I'll show you that whole operation here in a second. So I'll take the ones I've already sized, and I'll prime them, set them in. I've got a cartridge holder here. Okay. So if we were to do this in one fell swoop, right? We take our brass and we run it all the way up, set our primer in, and then all the way down. Voila, okay, primed. And basically you'll do that, I will do that for a box of 50 or even 100. My holder here holds 50. It's a great tray to have handy. So I'll do that with, say, 50 with a single stage press. And then once you've done that with 50 with the single stage press, you can go to your next operation. So first operation is to deprime and size, then to prime, reprime. The other option you have, and I don't have it on my single stage, I have it on my turret press, is this guy here. Okay, so you got this this guy here, which is the Lee Auto Prime. And it actually bolts to the press and hooks here and pivots in and feeds this guy. Actually, there's your bolt holes there. So you see 2 screw holes. You can add that onto this press so that it actually clicks and feeds. I don't have it on this press because the single stage press I tend to use for big bore handguns and for rifles, and I want to prime them one at a time. So I do have that on my turret press, and I also have it, if you can see here in the background, on my progressive press, where it feeds the primers as we go. So anyway, so single stage, that's how we do that. So we're done with that die. Our second die, if you're using your Lee system, after you've primed, is your powder die. So we'll take that out and we'll get our powder dye here. Your powder dye, if you've got a Lee system, has this little plug in the top. And that plug is a handy thing because it keeps the sizing plug from coming out. So that's your sizing plug. You can see mine's well oiled for the 45 Colt and 454 Casull if you load both. So that plug has to stay in there. So this end cap just keeps that plug from falling out when you're not using it. And you thread your powder measure, your perfect powder measure, onto that die, okay? And then you'll thread that into your press. And we already decided what powder we're going to use. But we're going to leave the powder out for now, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do. And I'll start with this thing actually out some. And I don't think that nut is set correctly, because I want to show you this setup. So you take a primed brass, put it in your shell holder, cycle your press. And what you're looking for is this disc has to come all the way out to that hole. Okay? So that, and you can't see, so let me adjust my camera a little. Okay? So see my Cub Scout projects in the background. So that disc has to come all the way out to line up with that hole. Okay? And so that's not happening. So I've got to thread this in. And so I'll go about a full turn and I'll press. Comes a little further. Okay, press. A little further. One more. Okay. Okay. So that comes all the way out to dump the powder now. Look at your casing. And what you'll see is your casing is still straight walled. It's still nice and pretty and straight walled. Okay. What we're actually looking for is the mouth of the case actually has to bell out slightly to keep from shaving off bullet. So I'm going to hold this lock ring and give this guy about a half a spin. So two things you have to do. This has to cycle completely, and you have to bell your case mouth. So this is cycling completely, so now I just have to bell my case mouth. So press, come back. Look at my case mouth. Still straight walled. Okay? And I'll show you what this looks like when I get to it. It is a very tedious process of trial and error. Press, bring it back. And there we go. We've gotten it. Okay? There we go. I don't know how well you can see that, but that mouth of that case, let me hold it up to the camera so you can see it. The mouth of that case is slightly belled, and you can feel it better than you can see it, but that mouth is slightly belled. And what I'm going to do is actually go just a hair further. I'm going to go just a hair further than that and kind of exaggerate it just for the camera. But what I just did was plenty. So that's there. You should be able to see that really well. So that mouth of that case bells outward ever so slightly. Okay? That's what you want. If you go too far, you will actually rip the case neck open and crush the case, because the die that's in there, the little piece that's in that die that expands this case mouth, has a stop on it. And if you go too far and you hit that stop, it actually crushes the case. It's really nasty. Ask me how I know, because I've done it a few times. Okay? But anyway, so you bell your case mouth. Now, once you've got this set up so that it will bell your case mouth, now you want to take a different one that's not been belled yet. Pour your powder in. So I'm going to pour my IMR Trail Boss in. Okay. And as I said in my last video, when you pick your powder, write your load on your powder measure so that you know what's going on. Okay. So we'll press down all the way, cycle this guy, and we see two things. Number one, we see that we've belled the case mouth. Okay. And number two, we see quite a bit of powder down in our case. Cool. Now we have to weigh this. And you have a couple of options. One is I have a Lyman digital scale. Okay. And I like my digital scale. It works quite well. And I'm going to show you how that works. Sit it where you can see it. Okay. So there's our Lyman scale. and we turn it on, and we get a weight, and we put our pan in there, okay, and we get a weight, and then we tare that, okay, that tear, and we're going to pour this in, and we're seeing 5.8 grains, 5.9 grains. Okay, cool. Now, I don't trust this, so I take it off, dump it back in, sit it back there. A little bit of powder stuck in the tray because we're getting a 0.6 grain reading here. Okay, so tear that, make sure it's at 0, run it again, and I'll do 3 or 4 readings this way. So I'll pour that in, and that time I've got some oil sticking to my case here. We're having some issues with that oil. The last time I used this dye, I obviously over-lubed it, and we're having some issues with oil and powder. Let's try that again. Okay, so you see I'm getting some powder sticking to this. So I'm going to have to take that dye apart and clean it up. So let me do that real quick, and I'll come back and I'll finish this up. While I was playing with this, taking it apart, I want to show you this little feature here. So got this little add-on bonus. So the standard powder measure, where you twist it on is where you twist it on. But you can buy this little aftermarket feature, okay, that you can add to their powder measure. And it's this little screw. I don't even honestly remember what it's called. But what it lets you do is it lets you sit this thing down and tighten it down this way so that you can actually see your powder measure in operation. And I really like that. So we've got this all set. We've got this happy and wonderful. And I got this dried off. So I let my kids help me reload a lot. And I told one of my boys to take this apart and lightly oil it last time we used it. And I think his version of lightly oiled is different than Dad's. So anyway, let's try that again. So we'll run this down, right? We've expanded our case neck. We've got a powder charge in there. 0 on our scale. Pour that in, and we're reading 5.8. And if you recall from our manual, let me dig my manual out here. If you recall from our manual, we were supposed to be getting, with that particular powder dye, a powder measure, I am our trail boss, read across, 5.8 with the 1.26. Cool. So that's actually coming up spot on. Typically, the Lee equipment will either come up really close, 5.7, 5.8, somewhere in that neighborhood, or it will come up low, 5.5, 5.6. And low is always better than high. So one more time, and that's reading. We've got a few sticking in the mouth here still, a little bit of oil residue. 5.5 that time. And so what you're shooting for is somewhere in that neighborhood. And digital scales, I don't always trust them. 5.6, so somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay, 5.5, 5.6. So it's throwing 5.8 or slightly under. And volumetric measures tend to be like that. They tend to be close enough. Okay, so I'm happy with that. We'll turn that off. Your other option for weighing these charges is the actual balance scale. So I'll push my primers to the side here. I'll set my balance scale up. Your balance scale for 5.5 grains, you'd slide this over so it shows a 5 here and then a 0.5 here. And you could pour this in. I'm not going to do that on camera because this is really hard to use without the camera running, and the camera angle I've got, there's no way I can do that. But if you don't have a digital scale, or if you're going to a max load. So when I'm using a Magnum load or I'm going to a max load, I always use the balance beam scale because I tend to trust it more than I do the electronic scale. So I'll put my powder measure, expand my case mouth, and I'll set this guy here facing up. Okay, powder measure, expanded case mouth, set this guy facing up. And you'll do that for your entire 50 rounds of ammo if you're using a single stage press. Okay, Now, if you're using a turret or a progressive or something like that, obviously you will do this as part of the bigger operation, okay? But you're seeing that nice belled case mouth. And remember, the more you bell that case mouth, the harder, the more aggressively you bell that case mouth, the shorter your brass life will be. So that's excessive. You really don't want to bell it that much. The only reason I've belled it that much is just so that you can kind of pick up on it. But that's actually excessive. So, cool. That's our powder measure die. That is step 2. So priming, expanding the case mouth, and dropping a powder measure. Always, always, always weigh your powder measures before you get started. And then usually after about 15, 20 shells, I'll weigh again. You really want to make sure that you're under that max load. So my max load for this is 6.5. I picked a load that should be 5.8. I should never worry about being over that max load, but you just need to make sure because you don't want to blow your gun up. So anyway, that is step 2 of reloading with a Lee single stage press. If you have questions, leave them in the comments, and thanks for watching.